Mental Prayer by Marie-Eugène de l'Enfant Jésus. Chapter 4 in I Want to See God, A Practical Synthesis of Carmelite Spirituality, Volume 1. The door of entry into this castle is prayer and meditation. Prayer is holding converse. To know God, to know oneself in the light of God, such is the twofold knowledge that constitutes the foundation of the spiritual life, regulates its movement, indicates its progress, assures its perfection. By what means is the soul going to bring itself to its own depths, to be united with God who dwells there? In the first pages of the interior castle, Saint Teresa gives the answer. Now, let us return to our beautiful and delightful castle and see how we can enter it. As far as I can understand, the door of entry into this castle is prayer and meditation. The quotation suggests at once the essential role of prayer in Teresian spirituality. We shall state precisely this role, then explain the definition and the classifications that Saint Teresa gives of prayer. A. Role of prayer in Teresian spirituality. The door of entry into this castle is prayer. Teresa is writing, in the first place, for her daughters, who are living under the Carmelite rule of Saint Albert. This rule, that codifies the usages of the hermits of Mount Carmel, contains one precept around which all the others gravitate. Meditate upon the law of the Lord, night and day. It is simple, clear, and absolute. Such was the life of the hermits of Carmel. They had come to the holy mountain to live according to the spirit of the great prophet Elias, whose entire soul was expressed in his battle cry, Vivit Dominus in cuius conspectus sto. The Lord is living, in whose sight I stand. This battle cry, inscribed in the emblem of Carmel, crystallizes the essential characteristics of the Carmelite ideal. The presence of God is the haven to which the soul must return whenever its several tasks are done. This is what the prophets of the desert did, as also the hermits on Mount Carmel. Saint Teresa claims descent from those solitaries and wants to revive their form of life in all its ancient fervor. All of us who wear this sacred habit of Carmel are called to prayer and contemplation, because that was the first principle of our order, and because we are descended from the line of those holy fathers of ours from Mount Carmel, who sought this treasure, this precious pearl of which we speak, in such great solitude and with such contempt for the world. A spiritual daughter of these hermits, Saint Teresa, like them, hungers and thirsts for God. She too lays claim to the silence and the solitude of the desert. Not being able to go there, she will create a desert in the midst of the cities by founding the Reformed convent of St. Joseph of Ávila. In it, life will be hermitical, thanks to a strict enclosure, grills, veils, a small number of religious, and solitude in one's cell. This is the triumph of her genius as an organizer, which excels in working out a great thought by means of a multitude of details. In solitary silence, souls can and must revive the primitive ideal of continual prayer. The saint recalls this fact to them on all occasions. From the time of their entrance into religious life, they are to habituate themselves to live constantly in the company of the good Master who has called them, and they have not come for any other purpose. In order to perfect this habit, more or less time will be necessary according to the facility that grace will give them. Whatever may be the difficulties, they must work at it until they have succeeded. Without this habitual intimacy with Jesus, the hermitical setting would make no sense and would have lost its soul. It would offer only ennui, or, worse still, a refuge for misanthropy and idleness. When Saint Teresa, having found her apostolic vocation, decides to open other convents on the model of Saint Joseph of Ávila, she is guided by the desire to bring together generous souls who want to pray for those who are defenders of the Church, and for the preachers and learned men who defend her. And she adds, "Help me to entreat this of the Lord, who has brought you together here for that very purpose. This is your vocation. This must be your business. These must be your desires, these your tears, these your petitions." The mission of the Teresian reform is to pray for the Church, to maintain within it a high level of prayer, and to teach other souls the ways of prayer. For Carmelite souls, then, prayer is not only a means of perfection, an exercise of the spiritual life. It is the essential occupation that must fill the day, that must form the woof of the spiritual life. It is the way of perfection that St. Teresa is going to mark out and describe by summing up in a treatise the counsels that she gave her daughters. It is, moreover, the way of perfection that she herself followed. Her personal spiritual life was so closely bound up with her prayer that the one followed the vicissitudes of the other, and their history is blended. She advanced as long as she was faithful to prayer, and the periods of least fervor were marked by a relaxation in that exercise. The book of her life gives accurate testimony to this and remains the best illustration of her teaching. It might be asked if these historical circumstances that explain the Teresian teaching do not make of it the doctrine of a school. The necessity for mental prayer, the role that is attributed to it, do these not correspond to a particular form of life, to a Carmelite concept of perfection revolving around mental prayer as others seem to rest on liturgical prayer or works of charity? In answer, there is no doubt that the teaching of St. Teresa is addressed to all Christians, or rather to all interior souls. Does the Church not seem to recognize this by proclaiming the saint Mater Spiritualium? St. Teresa asserts, in fact, that mental prayer is as necessary as vocal prayer, from which it cannot be separated. I want you to understand that if you are to receive the Pater Noster well, one thing is needful. You must not leave the side of the Master who has taught it you. You will say at once that this is meditation, and that you are not capable of it, and do not even wish to practice it, but are content with vocal prayer. You are right to say that what we have described is mental prayer, but I assure you that I cannot distinguish it from vocal prayer, faithfully recited with a realization of who it is that we are addressing. Further, we are under the obligation of trying to pray attentively. Better still, mental prayer is identified with every vital movement of grace in our soul. This grace is filial. Its essential movement is to rise towards God. When the soul no longer can, nor knows how to make this gesture which constitutes prayer properly so called, it is because grace is dead, or very near to dying. Writes St. Teresa, "A short time ago I was told by a very learned man that souls without prayer are like people whose bodies or limbs are paralyzed. They possess feet and hands, but they cannot control them. In the same way, there are souls so infirm and so accustomed to busying themselves with outside affairs that nothing can be done for them, and it seems as though they are incapable of entering within themselves at all." With this said, we can enumerate some of the benefits that mental prayer procures for the soul. It fortifies convictions and sustains generous resolutions to work and to suffer. It is a source of light, and fulfills with regard to charity the same role as the intellect with regard to the will. It precedes it, orientates it, and enlightens it at each step. When one has become contemplative, prayer transforms the soul from glory to glory, according to the word of the Apostle, into the very image of God. Thus, St. Teresa can conclude, if then prayer is so good and so necessary for those who do not serve God, but offend him, and if no one can possibly discover any harm that prayer can do him, which would not be much greater if he did not practice it, why should those who serve and desire to serve God give it up? Really, I cannot see any reason. From these diverse considerations we can note, 1. For St. Teresa, mental prayer, the door of the castle and the way of perfection, is less a particular exercise than the very practice of the spiritual life, being one with it, regulating and encompassing all the other elements, mortifications, readings, works of charity. Asceticism will be guided by mental prayer and will have for its aim to purify the gaze of faith and to destroy whatever is an obstacle to more profound intimacy with God. Study will furnish food for mental prayer and will search out the best spiritual ways. Works of mercy will be the fruit of the overflowing of contemplation. 2. The way of prayer is not a way of perfection exclusively for Carmelites. It opens out luminous and practical before all souls who aspire to penetrate into the depths of the divine intimacy, even if they are giving themselves to works of the apostolate. St. Teresa, a master in the spiritual science of prayer, is not only the mother of the Reformed Carmel, but of all interior souls, Mater Spiritualium. We can attribute to mental prayer this preponderant role in the spiritual life and impose it on all souls desirous of divine intimacy, only on condition of extending the limits a little too narrow, in which certain definitions seem to enclose it. Let us leave this care to St. Teresa, who is going to tell us what she means by mental prayer. B. What is mental prayer? In the book of her life, St. Teresa says, "Mental prayer, in my view, is nothing but friendly intercourse and frequent solitary converse with Him who, we know, loves us." This is a well-known definition, and rightly so, because with a simplicity astonishingly precise, she places in relief the constitutive elements of mental prayer. It will suffice for us to explain the terms. Mental prayer is only a friendly intercourse with God, says the saint. It is then a contact with God, an actualization of the supernatural union that grace establishes between God and our souls, or again, an exchange between two loves, that which God has for us, that which we have for Him. God is love. He created us out of love. He redeemed us out of love, and has destined us to a very close union with Him. God-love is present in our soul by a supernatural presence, personal and objective. There His love is in constant activity, a fire forever giving its warmth, a sun never ceasing to diffuse its light, a fountain always springing up into life everlasting. In order to meet with this love that is God, we have sanctifying grace, of the same nature as God, and consequently love like Him. This grace, which makes us His children, is an aptitude for union, for friendly exchange or intercourse with God, for reciprocal penetration. God-love, always active, calls to us and awaits our response. But He is immutable. It is our love which must go to Him. The turning of our love towards God, His persistent love for us, the meeting of our love with God-love, the affectionate exchange that is immediately established. That is what mental prayer is according to St. Teresa. Thus, mental prayer supposes supernatural love, hence sanctifying grace. It requires that love be active. But the activity of supernatural love suffices, for, as St. Teresa insists, mental prayer is only a friendly intercourse with God. Nevertheless, this love does not operate in the purely supernatural domain alone. It expresses itself in the most varied forms of human activity. Through the mediation of the will in which it resides, supernatural love takes into its service all the natural powers and all the faculties, and it uses them as it finds them in each one of us. Mental prayer becomes thus an exchange of friendship between the living being such as we are and the living God who dwells in us. If we consider, then, the natural activities brought into play, this exchange of friendship, already differentiated by the different modes of the divine action in each soul, will find a new and astonishing variety in the diversity of temperaments, the differences of age and development, and even in the multiplicity of the actual dispositions of the souls who are praying. According to temperaments, the intercourse of friendship will assume an intellectual form, or an affective, or even sensitive one. The child will put its love for Jesus in a kiss, a smile sent to the tabernacle, a caress for the infant Jesus, an expression of sadness before the crucifix. The youth will sing his love for Christ and will encourage its growth by using expressions and images that strike his imagination and his senses, while waiting until his intellect can provide strong thoughts to form a more spiritual and more nourishing prayer. Mental prayer will espouse even the changing nature of our dispositions. Sorrow, joy, numerous preoccupations, sickness, and fatigue, which make all activity impossible, or at least the activity of one faculty or another, will diversify this exchange which must always remain sincere and living in order to fulfill its definition of friendly intercourse. Under these various forms and throughout all these vicissitudes, the exchange will remain essentially the same. Supple and active, the love that animates it will make use of means and obstacles by turn, of ardor and aridity, of intellect or imagination, external senses or pure faith, in order to assure nourishment for its life and new modes for its expression. According to temperaments, and even at different hours, it will be sad or joyful, moved or insensible, silent or expansive, active or inert. It will take the form of vocal prayer or peaceful recollection, meditation or simple regard, affective prayer or painful dryness. It will experience elevation of spirit or the grip of anguish, sublime enthusiasm in the light, or sweet abasement in profound humility. Among the manifold modes and prayers, The best will be the one that will best unite the soul to God, and will assure it the best food for its development and its action. For after all, love for God does not consist in shedding tears, in enjoying those consolations and that tenderness which for the most part we desire, and in which we find comfort, but in serving Him with righteousness, fortitude of soul, and humility. Independent of any external forms set up in advance, Teresian prayer knows no other law than the free expression of two loves that meet and give themselves to each other. Does this freedom place the Teresian teaching in opposition to that of other great masters of the spiritual life? Some might think so. The masters of the Ignatian school state, in fact, that it is by an activity of the imagination and of the senses that the soul must go to meet God, and that vivid impressions give rise to firm resolutions. The masters of Saint-Sulpice ask that we make use of considerations in order to arrive at that communion with Christ which is true prayer, and which must have as its fruit the efficacious cooperation of the soul with Him. The first address themselves to the generality of persons of piety. The second are concerned with priests and seminarians. Both want to guide their disciples to friendship with God, and determine for them the method of prayer that is best adapted to their moral and spiritual temper. Likewise, modern masters of the spiritual life, adapting themselves to the needs of the spirit of our time, invite us simply to stop before some attitude of Jesus, or a word rich in meaning, in order to find a direct and living contact with Christ. Of these modes of prayer, transformed into methods suited to various categories of souls, Saint Teresa does not speak in her definition. Her silence is not one of depreciation, any more than it is lack of knowledge. Its purpose is to put in relief the constitutive and essential elements of mental prayer. Footnote: Saint Teresa took counsel with the Fathers of the Society of Jesus almost from the time of their installation at Ávila, 1555. She had Father Baltazar Alvarez, S.J., as director for 6 years. She certainly knew then the exercises of St. Ignatius and the method of prayer propagated by the Society. Avid for all that concerned prayer, she very probably also knew the method of a certain abbot of Montserrat, which was widely spread in Spain. Methods can be very useful, especially at the beginning of the spiritual life, for adapted to the temperament of each one, they sustain and judiciously guide the efforts of souls. They are beneficial only on the condition that one knows how to abandon the multiple and ordered acts that they prescribe when one has arrived at the end, namely, intimacy with God. Sometimes, unfortunately, these methods are badly understood. One considers the work of the faculties that they require much more than the friendly intercourse in which they are to lead. One confounds the mode of prayer with prayer itself. To make a prayer, they think, is to construct an imaginary framework, to feel, to hear, to see, to have strong impressions, or again to formulate considerations, or to have before the eyes some truth to contemplate. They devote all their efforts to work out the mode that has been imposed or chosen. They deprive themselves of the liberty of soul necessary for the life of love. The accessory has become the essential, to the point that they forget that prayer is an exchange, and they are no longer even thinking of God, to whom they ought to speak. The soul is enclosed in a particular mode of prayer, or rather is making vain efforts to restrain itself there, and not succeeding or not finding any grace in such a hard effort that remains sterile, it gives up discouraged with the conviction that it is not made for a life of mental prayer. Mental prayer is only a friendly intercourse, she says. Her definition, which includes the humble recitation of memorized formulas as well as the ecstasies which penetrate the divine secrets, because it is universal, is for that reason only the more illuminating and practical. It is that of a master of spiritual life, who is speaking not just for one category of souls, but for the universal church. This definition, finally, so wide and at the same time so exact, takes care to respect the sovereign liberty of God and that of the soul in their relations, a care over and over again evinced by Saint Teresa. Such liberty seems to her necessary for the growth of the soul and its perfect submission to the action of God, and so she defends it against all tyranny, should this come from methods that are too rigorous or from direction that would suppress it. Footnote: in the way of perfection, Saint Teresa herself will give a method which is the prayer of recollection. This method is not bound to any precise form of activity of the faculties and only stresses the preoccupation of leading the soul to God through Jesus Christ. If one finds in a soul signs of the action of God, namely humility and progress in virtue, one must not disturb it in its modes of prayer. It has a right to its liberty, and all have a duty to respect this. Intimate exchange of friendship and frequent solitary converse with God. The exchange is essentially intimate, for love has need of intimacy. Contact with God is established in the depths of the soul, in those regions where God dwells and where supernatural love is poured out in us. In the measure that this love is strong and active, the friendly exchanges with Him will be frequent and intimate. Mental prayer is also a personal prayer. Even in the form of public prayer, or when it is the prayer of a group in unison, it remains a solitary converse with God in each individual, and because of the soul's intimate contact with Him. And this silent, personal converse of the soul with its inner guest is the inspiration, the soul of the combined exterior expression. Friendly intercourse with God, who we know loves us, concludes the saint. These so simple words conceal a grave problem, that of the nature of the love that unites us to God, and of the laws that regulate it. The first terms of the definition, intimate exchange of friendship with God, call up the thought or memory of the affectionate intimacy that unites us to persons. We dream of a like intimacy with God. Is it possible? The friendly intercourse with God in prayer and the affectionate relations with a human friend are both inspired by love. But the two loves are not in the same order. The first is supernatural, the second is natural. We see the friend that we love. We appreciate his good qualities by experience. We feel his affection for us and ours for him. This affection, even very pure, develops on the natural plane and affects our human faculties. On the other hand, I do not see God to whom prayer unites me. He is pure spirit, infinite being, beyond the grasp of my human faculties. No one has seen him. It is his only Son, who is in his bosom, who has spoken to us of him. The supernatural love that unites me to God is of the same nature as God, hence as far removed from any apprehension by my natural powers as is God himself. The friendly commerce of mental prayer develops between supernatural realities which are outside the domain of the merely human faculties. Faith alone reveals them to us with certitude, but without dispelling the mystery that surrounds them. It is then, thanks to the certitude of faith, yet through the obscurity that it leaves, that we can have this commerce of friendship with God, who, according to St. Teresa, we know loves us. That God loves us is certain. That we have contact with him by faith is a certain truth. But supernatural penetration in God can be effected without leaving us any light, any feeling, any experience whatever of the riches that we have drawn from it. Nevertheless, the commerce of friendship with God by faith enriches us surely. God is love, communicating himself eternally. Just as one cannot plunge his bare hands into water without getting them wet, or into a fire without burning them, likewise one cannot have contact with God by faith without receiving from his infinite riches. The poor sick woman who tried to reach Jesus through the dense crowd in the streets of Capernaum said within herself, "If I can touch but the hem of his garment, I shall be cured." She finally succeeds, and with a touch that thrills her master, she draws from him the healing cure. Every contact with God by faith is likewise efficacious. Independently of the particular graces that it might ask and obtain, it takes from God an increase of supernatural life, a deepening of charity. Love seeks in mental prayer a sustenance, a development, and the perfect union that will satisfy all its desires. Speaking of mental prayer, St. Therese of the Child Jesus writes, "With me prayer is an uplifting of the heart, a glance towards heaven, a cry of gratitude and love, uttered equally in sorrow and in joy. In a word, it is something noble, supernatural, which expands my soul and unites it to God. Sometimes when I am in such a state of spiritual dryness that not a single good thought occurs to me, I say very slowly the Our Father or the Hail Mary, and these prayers suffice to take me out of myself and wonderfully refresh me." One could not better describe this loving converse, at once so simple and profound, so living a thing and so supernatural, which tells of the soul's love for God, and in telling it enkindles it further. C. Degrees of prayer. Mental prayer, which for St. Teresa is the essential exercise of the spiritual life, must normally develop with it until it reaches perfection. A classification according to degree of perfection must then be possible and appears to be necessary. Yet, how evaluate the perfection of prayer? On what bases establish this classification? Saint Teresa remains faithful to her definition, in which she underlined friendly commerce with God as the essential element of mental prayer. It is on this quality of friendship, that is, on the quality of supernatural love and its effects in virtue and in union, that she is going to judge the perfection of prayer itself. Footnote: in the interior castle, Saint Teresa no longer distinguishes as a special degree of prayer this third water, or sleep of the powers. Probably, although very strongly impressed at first by the effects of this prayer, of sensible intensity notably greater than prayer of simple quiet, she realized later, in a more precise and complete vision of all the degrees of prayer, that the sleep of the powers was only an overflowing into the senses of the divine taste of quiet, and, being an imperfect union, it would be attached to the prayer of quiet. In the book of her life, she gave a well-known classification of the degrees of prayer, illustrated by the gracious comparison of the 4 ways of watering a garden. It seems to me that the garden can be watered in 4 ways: by taking the water from a well, which costs us great labor, or by a water wheel and buckets, when the water is drawn by a windlass. I have sometimes drawn it in this way. It is less laborious than the other and gives more water. Or by a stream or a brook, which waters the ground much better, for it saturates it more thoroughly, and there is less need to water it often, so that the gardener's labor is much less. Or by heavy rain, when the Lord waters it with no labor of ours, a way incomparably better than any of those which have been described. And now I come to my point, which is the application of these 4 methods of watering by which the garden is to be kept fertile, for if it has no water it will be ruined. It has seemed possible to me in this way to explain something about the 4 degrees of prayer to which the Lord of his goodness has occasionally brought my soul. The saint explains her comparison. Beginners in prayer, we may say, are those who draw up the water out of the well. This, as I have said, is a very laborious proceeding, for it will fatigue them to keep their senses recollected, which is a great labor because they have been accustomed to a life of distraction. Then they have to endeavor to meditate upon the life of Christ, and this fatigues their minds. This is what is meant by beginning to draw up water from the well, and God grant there may be water in it. By using a device of windlass and buckets, the gardener draws more water with less labor, and is able to take some rest instead of being continually at work. It is this method, applied to the prayer called the prayer of quiet, that I now wish to describe. This state is a recollecting of the faculties within the soul, so that its fruition of that contentment may be of greater delight. But the faculties are not lost, nor do they sleep. The will alone is occupied, in such a way that, without knowing how, it becomes captive. It allows itself to be imprisoned by God, as one who well knows itself to be the captive of him whom it loves. Let us now go on to speak of the third water, that is, of running water proceeding from a river or a spring. The Lord is now pleased to help the gardener, so that he may almost be said to be the gardener himself, for it is he who does everything. This state is a sleep of the faculties, which are neither wholly lost, nor yet can understand how they work. When the 4th water falls from heaven, the soul feeds itself in the midst of the most profound and sweet delights, in an almost complete swoon. This water produces at times complete union, or even a flight of the spirit, in which the Lord gathers up the soul, and raises it up till it is right out of itself. I have heard that it is in this way that the clouds or the sun gather up the vapor. At the time that Saint Teresa was writing the book of her life, she had not yet come to the spiritual marriage. The classification of the prayers that she gives in the interior castle, when she is enjoying the plenitude of her grace and her experience, is richer and more precise in nuances, more detailed and more complete. Since prayer is a friendly intercourse with God, and consequently the fruit of the double activity of the love of God for the soul and of the supernatural love of the soul for God, Saint Teresa distinguishes 2 phases in the development of this double activity. In the first phase, God testifies to his love by a general help or ordinary grace given to the soul. It is the soul itself that keeps the initiative and the principal share of activity in prayer. In the second phase, God, intervening in the prayer by a more and more potent special help, progressively asserts his mastery over the soul, and reduces it little by little to passivity. The first phase, which corresponds to the first way of watering the garden by laboriously drawing water from the well, includes the first 3 mansions of the interior castle. The second phase, which corresponds to the 3 other ways of watering the garden, includes the 4 other, more interior mansions. The prayer of quiet, second water, and the sleep of the powers, third water, imperfect contemplative prayers, are in the 4th mansions. The 4th way of watering the garden, which admits of a whole range of the prayer of union increasingly perfect, is studied with great care and a marvelous wealth of detail in the 5th, 6th, 7th mansions. From a consideration of the classification given in the life, one might have thought that progress in prayer was in proportion to the intensity of the sensible effects and the diminution of the effort of the soul. A study of the interior castle reveals clearly that St. Teresa considered only the quality of love and the excellence of the effects produced. She declares a form of prayer higher when it produces a greater degree of love, and when that love exercises greater influence over human activity, which it must master and render docile to God, who dwells in the soul. Footnote: the prayer that is the best made and the most pleasing to God is always the one that leaves after it the best effects. I am not speaking of great desires, for although desires are a good thing, they are not always such as our self-love presents them to us. I call good effects those that are made manifest in works, so that the soul lets the desire that it has for the glory of God be known by its attention to work only for Him. Prayer, then, will be perfect when the soul, transformed by love, has all its energies strong and supple, altogether attuned to the delicate touches of the Spirit of God.